Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Stock Market Today. It's Ali, Coram, and Justin Nielsen here with a breakdown of the action in today's session, Monday, August 26th, where we saw a bit of selling, especially in the Nasdaq today ahead of a key earnings report later this week, Justin.
Yeah, all eyes are going to be on Nvidia, but in the meantime, we've got a few other stocks that we can check out in kind of different areas, including Sprouts Farmers Market, Netflix, and over in Argentina, MercadoLibre.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stocks out there right now. So we will get to those. But first, let's take a look at the major indexes. The Nasdaq today down a little over 0.8% in today's session. The S&P 500 off by 0.3%. The Russell 2000 was slightly in the negative, just a fraction lower, reversing lower here after a strong early start. And then the Dow 0 DJIA up about 0.2%. So, Justin, your thoughts on the action today, starting with the Nasdaq here?
Well, so the one thing I can say about the Nasdaq is that we were asking for a pause and we're getting it. So far, the last 2 days have been inside that first distribution day that we had. And so even though technically Friday did count as a subsequent follow-through day, and we've been talking about how we've been getting a lot of those, it's a little bit too hard to get super excited when you're inside a big day like we had on Thursday. But not a disaster. I like that we're holding around the 50-day moving average line. Tech certainly got a hit today. You can see that by looking at XLK, which is the tech sector spider ETF. So, but even that is still right around the 50-day moving average line. So I don't think it's time to count the Nasdaq out by any stretch of the imagination. Certainly what's probably going to make the headlines is that the Dow Jones Industrial Average did hit a new all-time high today. Couldn't keep it. But it's still notable that it happened. And, as you mentioned, the Russell 2000 did end up, turning negative by the close. But, down like a fraction. But really, given the huge day that it had on Friday, that was not an inside day for the Russell 2000. That was a big 3% plus day. And even though it couldn't, hold on to the gains from today, it's not giving up gains either.
Right, exactly. Okay, we already looked at XLK. Let's also take a look at XLE today, Justin, up almost 1% on the day, while oil was up 3%.
Yeah, so we talked about this a little bit on IBD Live. Look, there's a lot of, stuff going on in the Middle East, right? And that can have some pressure on oil prices. There's a lot of variables that go into this. It's the price of the dollar, the tensions there in the Mideast, supply, demand, all of these things are factors. Look, maybe it's breaking a downtrend, but I think that this might be something where there's a lot of potential volatility. So even though this was the best sector today, again, just looking at the 11 spider sector ETFs, I think I'm holding out, holding out on this one because it just seems like there could be a little bit more volatility here. And I'd like to see more stocks setting up, more stocks getting above their 50-day moving average line and putting time above that important moving average line before I go for it.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's not like this area can't trend and can't outperform. You go back to 2021, that was really the place to be. So,
Sure.
But you got to look at where these stocks are in relation to their moving averages. Are they trending higher? And most importantly, what does that relative strength look like? Are you getting any outperformance here?
And so far, that's been in a pretty severe downtrend. And so with so many other areas looking better, it's kind of hard to make a huge case for, sure, look, on the geopolitical side, there are a lot of pressures to make oil prices go up. But there are also things that can happen in the news that could make it go down. So it's like, what is my edge here? And that's where a lot of times I just go back to the charts, go back to the relative strength. And if I'm not getting something that's already kind of showing me the power, then what makes me think that I can make it go by myself?
Right. Okay, one more ETF to look at before we move on, and that's consumer staples here, Justin, continuing to climb up another 0.7% today. And you can see the relative strength line over the last couple of months trying to break a downtrend. But this is a defensive area. So what do we make of this?
Well, I think that, for as much as we were saying, hey, it's time to go, maybe switch from defensive growth to just growth, maybe not so fast. I think that there are still some green shoots in a lot of these areas. The XLP, XLU, XLB were the three top, besides XLE, those were the three top. And that's the utilities, the materials. So again, a lot of things that are kind of a little bit more on the defensive side. So I think that it's still important to keep these on your radar. Keep looking for those stocks that are, again, just showing the relative strength. And so in that way, you're letting the market tell you what's working instead of you trying to force your opinion on the market. Because in my experience, that just doesn't work.
Yeah. Well said. Okay, let's take a look at SFM. This is Sprouts Farmers Market. A nice move over the century mark at 100, with the stock up 3.2% today in elevated turnover.
We've talked a lot on this show about one of my favorite setups. When you have a strong earnings move and then you pause, let's just go ahead and take a look at the weekly chart here. This has been really kind of nice, tight action, just not giving up anything from that huge earnings move it had. And so now we're kind of breaking up. It almost looks like that high type flaggish, type thing. Of course, this doesn't qualify because it didn't have the run up that we see for a high tight flag, but you're getting that kind of action where you just don't want to give up gains. The market is getting comfortable with that higher valuation. And now on the daily chart, you see that there's some power coming into it today with a nice 3% plus move, some volume behind it to boot, above average volume, over 50%. So this is going back to the old rules of, hey, when you get a breakout on over 50% volume, above average volume, that's something that you have to pay attention to. So you've also, just one more thing to add to the list here on Sprouts Farmers Market is that mark above the century mark, the 100 level. So that's also a positive. So yeah, there's a lot I think to like about this. And let's give a final shout out to that relative strength line, because that's looking very strong, well above its moving average lines. You can't beat that.
Yeah. Quite bullish there. And shares today closing about 6% above the 21-day line. So perhaps, depending on how traders out there are managing their risk, a decisive break of that level, maybe even today's low is the first area to trim. Things to consider there.
Yeah, depending on how much risk you're willing to take. And again, some of this is going to depend on what kind of position size you want. They both affect each other. Okay. If you want to give your stock a little bit more room, that might mean you reduce your position size. If you're going to keep it pretty tight, you can afford to go a little bit higher on your position size, but you don't want to go overboard because there is still gap down risk. So I think, either today's low or even the low of Thursday, I think are some really good areas. And you can kind of see that the low of Thursday really coincides with a lot of congestion areas where it did find support. So I probably prefer that one, especially since it does seem like right now stocks are kind of wiggling and wobbling a little bit.
Right.
So they might need a little bit more room for you to not get shaken out. And so again, you can just adjust your position size to be able to handle that extra risk.
Exactly. Yeah. And it lines up right around with that 21-day line as well, which we like to see. Okay, let's take a look at Netflix, Justin. Tried to break out of a cup base right around that 700 level, now forming an orderly handle, high handle here, it looks like.
Yeah, that's the way that I'm looking at this. And just for disclosure purposes, I do have one share that I have of my wife's that if you go to the weekly chart,
we're about to not be able to see it anymore. So
yeah, pretty soon, because it's way back there in April, way back then that my wife said, hey, what happened to Netflix? It got really slammed. And I said, yeah, that's something I would never touch. She goes, buy me some. And so I've held on to that for her. Now, I've traded this along the way a number of times. And so while percentage wise, my wife's single share is doing much better than I am, money wise, I'm beating the pants off of her. So take that. But anyway, right now we have another potential setup. And, here's a cup formation. And as you mentioned, there have been a number of these stocks that have kind of broken out and then kind of come back in. But this is still holding, pretty high up there in its overall formation. So I would be interested to see if, as you said, can this form a high handle, kind of give us another, chance at a little consolidation, another potential entry, and right around 700, I think this could be a potential entry. So that's what I'm looking at. I'm not buying myself yet, except for that one share that I'm holding. But if this crosses 100, especially after maybe a little bit more of a pullback here, that's going to be high on my radar.
Yeah. Okay, we'll keep it on the watch list. Let's also look at MercadoLibre. It's shown a lot of power since its earnings report and getting above a resistance level right around 1800 and hasn't looked back, now tightening up around 2000.
Yes, and so it's that another century mark. Well, I guess you could call this a millennial mark. At 2000. So yeah, again, I'm liking the pauses here. Nice orderly pauses. It's not getting destroyed. It's not having a broken look to the chart. And so for some of these stocks, look, they're extended, or they've been running for a little while, and so you're probably looking at like, okay, I can't buy it up here. But if some of these can form these little shelves or little patterns, kind of pull back to their moving average line, that might not be a bad thing. And in a lot of these cases, it's not so much that they're pulling back as they're just going sideways and letting those moving average lines catch up to them. So that's not a bad thing either. And so I think that's where some of the stocks that I'm looking for those setups. As we mentioned on Friday, it's important to have that watch list, do that homework so that you're ready. Right now, there have been a couple things that I have gotten shaken out of, and I'm not looking at that as a bad thing. I'm looking at it as, okay, I have some cash available to me now to potentially deploy for some of these setups that look like they're coming.
Yeah. And who knows, maybe this is the beginning of a character change here for MercadoLibre, because this tight action is not something we've grown accustomed to seeing with this stock. It likes to form big bases on its way up. So subtle difference there this time.
You mentioned this at the outset, Ali, and this is going to be one of those things that I think we do have to just keep in mind, is that NVIDIA earnings are this week. It's something that a lot of people are going to be looking at, because not just for NVIDIA, but there's stocks like ANET that are setting up, Arista Networks, and just a lot of things in the AI space that, as NVIDIA goes, they may be going as well. So it's going to be an important bellwether, and something that is definitely worth watching.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will keep that in mind when we are looking at stocks and the market action this week. NVIDIA earnings coming up Wednesday after the close. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. That is it from us for today, but we'll be back with more tomorrow morning on IBD Live, and we hope you join us. Investors.com/IBD Live for all the details there. Thank you so much for tuning in. And thank you to our live audience, our loyal live watchers, for waiting for us. Justin, those hotspots come in handy, huh, when Spectrum outages happen.
Yep. So and thank you to my wife for letting me know what happened. I'm like scrambling feverishly, resetting routers and everything, but she let me know, hey, there's an outage there. And so that's why we have backups, right?
Exactly. All right. Well, thanks again, everyone, and we will see you back here tomorrow.